Hello, I'm Anna Foster, live from the Qatari capital, Doha. For the next 30 minutes, we're bringing you a special programme looking at the key developments from the first 7 days of the US-Israel-Iran conflict, which has dragged in countries across the Middle East and beyond. We'll be live with our correspondents across the region and around the world. And we'll have analysis from our specialists in our London newsroom, as we take a look at the defining moments of a week of war and the impact that it's having on the world. A week ago, Israel and the United States launched a large-scale offensive against Iran. And a week on, there is no end in sight. Donald Trump says there'll be no deal with Iran except for their unconditional surrender. Israel has launched a fresh wave of strikes, and those inside Iran, whose voices we've been hearing from through the week, have told us that last night was the worst so far. The IDF has continued targeting the Iranian-backed militant group and political party Hezbollah in Beirut and in the south of Lebanon, causing huge destruction in the south of the city. Meanwhile, Iran has launched further strikes on Israel. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and Qatar all say that they also intercepted drones and missiles overnight. We'll hear from our teams across the region on a war that started a week ago with this from President Trump.
The United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests.
Well, let's look back at some of the key moments from the war so far. On Saturday, the initial strikes from Israel and the US were decisive. By the end of the first day, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was dead. Tehran retaliated by firing missiles at Israel and US military bases across the Middle East. On Sunday, Israel and the US launched another wave of strikes at Iran. Planes were grounded across the Gulf as Iranian drones wrought havoc, even striking a British RAF base in Cyprus. Later that day, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer gave permission for America to use RAF bases, but only for what he called defensive strikes on Iran. On Monday, a new front opened up in Lebanon. The Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel, and the IDF struck back hard, hitting Beirut and large parts of southern Lebanon. As strikes continued on Tuesday, President Trump criticised some of his closest allies, calling the UK very uncooperative and describing Sir Keir Starmer as no Winston Churchill. On Wednesday, an American submarine sank an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean. It marked the first time that a US torpedo had taken down an enemy ship since World War II. On Thursday, the UK ramped up its assets in the region, sending 4 Typhoon fighter jets here to Qatar as part of the Prime Minister's promise to strengthen defences across the Middle East. Which brings us to Friday. Strikes continuing here across the region, and people living in Iran telling BBC Persian that the bombardment overnight was the worst so far. Well, there's plenty to come from our teams across the region, but first let's take a look at the big picture. Joining me now is our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet. Lise, has this week fundamentally changed both Iran and the Middle East?
Iran is a different country. The region is a different region. This is a momentous time in the region, which has seen all too many momentous times. There is a before and after moment. Iran has now been pushed into what it sees as an existential battle. After 1 week of war, its military assets, its security forces have been degraded, but the Islamic Republic of Iran isn't defeated. Dozens of its top clerics and top commanders have been assassinated, but Iran still shows no sign of surrender. And as you just alluded to, the people of Iran, 92 million people, including those who have been calling for change and who had dared to hope that the start of this war signaled the imminent end of the Islamic Republic, now find themselves trapped in a vicious war, leading them and their country into an uncertain future. And the region, Anna, the old rapprochements between Iran and its Arab neighbors, which had changed decades of being a dagger drawn, are now wrecked. One senior official in the Gulf told me it would take many years, possibly generations, to repair the damage of the last week. And there was always a risk when this war was unleashed that it would widen, but it has escalated and intensified at a speed never seen before. So much so that today there is talk of the economies of the world being brought down. For so many years, and especially since the Gaza war triggered this confrontation we are now seeing spilling right across the region, people talked about whether this was a third world war. I think we shouldn't get caught up in defining it in this way. But without a doubt, this is a war which is drawing in much of the world, and it's only 1 week on.
At least you said. Our chief international correspondent, thank you for your analysis, as always. Well, I want to take you now to the two countries which launched this operation, to the US and to Israel. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is in Washington, D.C., and our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Beshega, is in Tel Aviv. Sarah, to you first, Donald Trump was warning of military action for weeks, 7 days in. What is the view from Washington?
The administration tell you that the war is going extremely well, even ahead of schedule is what we keep getting in briefings, and they are pleased with what they've managed to achieve from the air. They have changed their minds, or certainly changed what they're saying several times about what the reasons for going to war now are and what the aims are. Donald Trump started off telling us that this war was to stop Iran ever developing a nuclear weapon, to get rid of their ballistic missiles, their conventional weapons that could threaten US targets in the region, and to make sure they could never acquire a nuclear weapon. Today, he's posted on social media saying that this conflict will not end until there is unconditional surrender from the Iranian government. He is demanding total capitulation, basically, from Tehran, and even saying he wants to be personally involved in choosing who the next supreme leader is. Now, he wants somebody who would work with the US and give in to his demands, including the country abandoning its nuclear program. But he's also said that while the US had drawn up a list of several possible contenders, they've now all been killed in US and Israeli airstrikes. So they are talking now about ramping up the scale of this war, saying that over the next few days they will multiply the combat power that they're using against Iran, and talking now about a conflict that may last for 4 to 5 weeks, but of course it's not entirely within their control when they can finish this.
And Hugo, how is the first week of this war being viewed in Israel?
Well, Anna, the view here is that this is a just war, and for decades Iran has been framed in this country as an existential threat, including by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's written a book where he talks about it. I'm sure a lot of people remember when in 2012 he went to the United Nations with the illustration of a bomb to say that in his view Iran was close to developing a nuclear weapon. Now, for a very long time, he's been telling the world that Iran must be stopped. So I think this is reflected on how many people in Israel view this war. There has been a poll this week suggesting that 93% of the population of Israeli Jews are in favor of taking military action against Iran. And I thought it was very interesting that most of those people said the bombing in Iran should continue until the regime there, as they say it, collapses. Now, as Sarah said, the statements coming from American officials have been vague, contradictory about what they're trying to achieve in this war. But here in Israel, officials have been very open about what they're trying to achieve. They hope to create conditions for the regime in Iran to be toppled. They've been talking about weeks of a bombing campaign. They seem to be against any kind of diplomatic de-escalation, diplomatic off-ramp in this conflict. And finally, domestically, there's been very little criticism of the Prime Minister's decision to go to war, even from his opponents, and very little debate about what might come next.
Hugo Beshega in Tel Aviv and Sarah Smith in Washington, D.C. Thank you both. Well, let's take a look at how other countries across the region have been drawn into this war over the last 7 days. Wira Davis is in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, and our senior international correspondent, Ola Guerin, is in Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. Wira, you've seen heavy attacks by Israel today. There have been large-scale evacuation orders. What's the latest where you are?
Yeah, and there's been around-the-clock attacks by Israeli missile strikes, mainly on the southern area of Beirut known as Dahia, where Hezbollah has one of its strongholds. But it's pretty clear that the scope and scale of Israel's bombing campaign here in Lebanon has been expanding in the last couple of days. The whole of southern Beirut now has been issued with an evacuation warning by the Israelis. Also, much of southern Lebanon itself, below the Litani River, people have been told to leave the area, anticipating Israeli ground offences. Indeed, Israeli troops have already re-invaded southern Lebanon to try and stop Hezbollah firing rockets towards Israel. So there's a great deal of concern in Lebanon what might happen next. It's not just the south, also the eastern Bekaa Valley has been attacked. There have been evacuation orders issued for that. And even as far north as Tripoli in northern Lebanon, there have been Israeli missile strikes as well. We've heard today that at least 200 people have been killed in the 5 days of conflict we've had here. 300,000 people have been made either homeless or had to leave their homes and their areas after Israeli warnings. And Hezbollah's decision to join in the conflict on behalf of Iran, if you like, after the killing of the supreme leader, has been criticised throughout Lebanese society, because the last thing that most other Lebanese people who aren't Hezbollah supporters want is another long and costly conflict. But I think things are only going to get worse here before they get better. I think Israel sees this as a chance now to defeat Hezbollah militarily once and for all. But who knows what will happen and how long those Israeli troops will remain in southern Lebanon, and how much of the capital will be bombed before Israel decides it has achieved its aims. Anna.
And Orla, what's the situation where you are in Erbil?
Well, we've had daily strikes since the war began, missiles, ballistic missiles and drones targeting bases of the Iranian Kurdish opposition. We've also had attacks on facilities linked to the US, particularly Erbil International Airport. And we're broadcasting tonight, Anna, from inside our hotel room because local authorities have told us for security reasons we cannot use our balcony and we cannot film out the window. Now, the airport was home to, or is home to, a US military base, which we believe is now empty, but it continues to be targeted. And in the last hour or so, we have had reports of strikes beyond this region of northern Iraq, this autonomous Kurdish region. The latest reports we're getting are of strikes on oil facilities in Mosul that are linked to both the US and the UK. Now, I think that there's every chance the situation here is going to get a lot more complicated and a lot worse. President Trump is now openly encouraging these Iranian Kurdish factions, the opposition groups, which are based here and have been here for decades. He would like to see them go across the border and begin an operation inside Iran. He has said that would be a wonderful idea, and I would be all for it. We know these groups, some of them at least, are planning to do that. They want to do that. One spokeswoman this week told us we have had these plans for the 47 years of the Islamic Republic. What's less clear is how much American military support they might receive. Will they have air cover? They just don't know. We've also been told that they are waiting to see signs that the Americans have seriously weakened the capacity of the IRGC, the Islamic Republican Guard Corps, on the other side of the border, because currently they have bases, they have weapons depots. They could inflict a lot of damage on the Kurds. And the spokeswoman that we spoke to this week said, look, the heaviest weapons we have are Kalashnikovs. So we have this really inexplicable situation in a way where you have the world's most powerful military, the United States, with all of its weaponry, in tandem with the Israeli army and all of its military sophistication. And Donald Trump is now openly calling on a few thousand poorly armed Kurdish fighters to get involved in this battle inside Iran. It certainly looks like everything is not going according to plan.
Orla Guerin in Erbil and Moira Davis in Beirut. Thank you both. Well, one of the big questions right now, of course, is how long this could all go on for. So let's take a look at the military state of play with our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale. Jonathan, how do things stand on the ground right now?
Well, Anna, there's no doubt that it is Israel and the US that have the upper hand. A high tempo of strikes they've been carrying out over the past week, which we are told by the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will increase in the coming days. Just to give you a sense of scale, Israel has already used 5,000 bombs and missiles. That's as much as they used in the entire 12-day war when they targeted Iran's nuclear program last June. The US has conducted more than 2,000 strikes, and each of those strikes would include multiple munitions. And it's clear that they are going through munitions probably faster than they can be produced. That said, they clearly also have stockpiles. And the important thing for both the US and Israel at the moment is they have air superiority. They can pretty much fly anywhere they want in Iran, looking for high-value targets, which they've been doing, but also hunting down those weapons, those launch sites. Now, that said, Iran is still showing resistance, but the resistance is less than it was at the start of the war. So at the beginning of this war, Iran was firing more than 300 missiles on the first day. Pentagon says that's gone down 90%. The number of drones, remember they had tens of thousands of drones, it was thought, before this war started. That's gone down 80%. Now, that does not mean that Iran is down and out. They still can hide. Remember, it's a country 3 times the size of France. Those weapon stocks can be hidden. They also still have proxies, namely Hezbollah, which you've mentioned, but also the Houthis in Yemen, who they supported in the past. And they can strangle. This could affect all of us because they can strangle trade through the Strait of Hormuz, where about 20% of the world's oil comes through. Now, Donald Trump has set himself a very high bar indeed, saying that he wants to end this war with the unconditional surrender of Iran's government. But if you look at what's happened in the region recently, Israel bombing Gaza for more than 2 years, that did not lead to the unconditional surrender of Hamas. The US pretty much bombed the Houthis in Yemen for the best part of a year. That did not lead to their unconditional surrender either. So I think it's still very difficult to see a quick end to this war.
Jonathan Beale, our defence correspondent, thank you. Well, the US and Israel are continuing to strike Iran, and a state-imposed internet shutdown there means that there is very little information that actually makes its way out of the country. But we have managed to hear from some voices in the capital, Tehran. Our team from BBC Persian have put voices to their words. Take a listen.
The house was shaking for 5 minutes straight. Last night was the worst night. No, I'm not okay. I barely slept last night because of the constant explosions.
People have developed a kind of illness of constantly checking the news. For a week now, my blood pressure hasn't come down. The situation really isn't good for me. Honestly, I might survive the bombing, but not the stress.
And joining us now from our BBC Persian service is Bahman Kalbasi, who's in New York. Bahman, what conversations are you managing to have with people inside Iran?
Well, they're telling a story of casualties growing, fear among the public of what comes next also rising, but still many holding on to the hope that this somehow could bring an end to this regime. But obviously feelings shift and change and are different depending how close one is to the impact, to the sounds of bombs dropping, how much people's lives are disrupted, how much they are living in this blackout of internet, and only sources of information are the limited ones they can see and hear. Some of it state TV basically giving them an image that completely different from the realities of their lives. So it's a shifting situation, and as we see targets like hospitals being severely damaged, schools hit, as well as Red Crescent centers, a feeling that this will widen more than just the regime posts and military sites, that this could very much disrupt a city of 9-10 million, sometimes feels like being carpet bombed when you look at the images. But a lot of people still, when I talk to them, are worried, calm, still thinking something good will come of it, but also fearful of how long this might go, and what would happen to this country's basic necessities being delivered, food, water, electricity, how long will that last? And all of that is a compounding feeling, and for millions of people who are completely out of the rooms of decision making. Bombs are being dropped on them by decision makers in Washington and Tel Aviv, and the leaders of Iran are going on state TV and threatening them with absolutely punishing iron fist. We saw images of officials on state TV telling mothers and fathers that your kids will be shot and killed if they so much as think about protesting. So they are basically stuck in a very difficult situation, but some millions who were out in the streets 2 months ago wanting an end to this regime are still holding on to hope.
Batman Karbasi from BBC Persian in New York, thank you. Well, Batman was talking there about the people who make these decisions, and the conflict is impacting governments worldwide. In the UK, the Prime Minister has already faced a number of difficult diplomatic decisions about the UK's involvement. Well, Nick Eardley is in Westminster. Nick, this conflict is causing complications already for the special relationship.
It certainly put more strain on the relationship between President Trump and Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, President Trump has made it absolutely clear how angry he is with the Prime Minister, saying that he's no Winston Churchill, that he was very unhappy at some of the initial decisions the UK took. I mean, it's worth pointing out the UK position has evolved in the past 7 days. So the initial decision was not to get involved in the strikes that the US and Israel launched on Iran, and not to allow, this is the crucial bit, the US to use UK bases in that process. That's what angered President Trump. Since then, the UK has said the US can use bases, but only for some limited defensive actions, trying to take out Iranian missiles and things like that to protect the UK and its allies. So clearly that's put strain on the relationship between London and Washington. It's also caused quite a political row here as well. Quite often when conflict breaks out, Westminster tries to come together and at least sound like it's working on the same page. It's really not happening here. I was in Parliament on Wednesday for Prime Minister's questions, and it was pretty heated. The Conservatives really critical of the Prime Minister's decision making on this, saying that he's been weak and that he needs to show more support for our allies, particularly for the United States. There's no sense at the moment that the UK is about to change its strategy, but as we all know, as war progresses, things can change quite significantly.
Thank you, Nick. Nick Eardley there in Westminster. Well, conflict here in the Middle East almost always means uncertainty in the market. So let's look at the economic impact that this war is already having with our economics editor, Faisal Islam. Faisal, we're hearing some really big and quite worrying warnings from countries in this region. What is the impact so far on the global economy?
Yes, Anna. I mean, the context here is actually the impact on, for example, the crude oil market was far more muted in the first couple of days of this crisis than we would have expected, given what we have in terms of the reality of the situation, which is the Straits of Hormuz, the 24-mile at its narrowest point gap between Oman and Iran, where a fifth of the world's oil and a large proportion of the exported gas has to transit. There has been almost no traffic of energy through that key artery of the world economy for days. A few ships have got through, but almost nothing. The result of that was originally seen most specifically in the gas markets, a doubling in the futures price for gas. Now we have had a 25% increase in the crude oil price, going up to $94 a barrel, with where you are, the Qatari energy minister, saying that the whole Gulf essentially won't be able to export its energy in the coming days, following on from Qatar announcing a force majeure in terms of its exports of gas. And what we're seeing is other markets where perhaps people didn't even know that the refined products, things like jet fuel, things like fertilizer precursors, are also made in that region and have to transit that Straits of Hormuz. And people are worried in terms of the markets, and we're seeing the prices of those commodities also shoot up. So what you have is not yet a sort of 1970s style energy crisis. The energy prices are popping up, but you do have fears of an inflationary wave and some chaos actually in the government, debt markets and stock markets too.
Faisal Islam, our economics editor, thank you very much indeed. Well, as we've been hearing, a week of war, 7 days of conflict has really rocked this Middle East region, from the Gulf, from Qatar, where I am this evening, right across the region and right around the world as well. It's impacted governments, it's impacted global markets. And with his call for Iran's unconditional surrender, President Trump appears to have cut off any possibility at the moment that the conflict will end anytime soon. And of course, for people in Iran, they see this continued bombardment. People in Tehran say that last night was the worst night of bombing that they had experienced so far. Well, as the conflict continues, we will of course have ongoing coverage for you right across the BBC with our teams around the region and the world. So whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, on radio or on TV, thank you for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow and every day with the Iran War Today.